Hello, everyone. Welcome to Independent Women's Forum's Economic Center for Opportunity, our CEO. And I am Patrice Onwuka, the director of the Center for Economic Opportunity. This is our home for tech, labor, and broad economic policy. So today's topic, you've seen it, is it time to move beyond DEI? Now, DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, in the workplace, it's everywhere, from corporate anti-bias training to mandates on gender and race representation. Now, the interesting thing is that DEI may actually be on its way out. Just consider these headlines for a minute. MSNBC: implicit bias training doesn't work. Here's what does. Or NBC: hamstrung by golden handcuffs, diversity roles disappear 3 years after George Floyd's murder inspired them. Harvard Business Review: the failure of the DEI industrial complex. And here's Bloomberg: hiring for diversity officers stalls 2 years after big promises. So there's ample criticism of DEI and even legislative pushback on DEI initiatives in academia, education, and the workplace. So today we're going to explore the legal and societal pitfalls of DEI initiatives, particularly for women. Joining me today are Jean Hamilton from the America First Legal and May Mailman, who's a senior legal fellow with the Independent Women's Law Center. Now, let me give you a couple of brief bios. May is a former legal advisor to President Donald J. Trump, where she advised on a wide range of policies, including healthcare, immigration, and social issues. While at the White House, she also worked with in the office of the Chief of Staff and the Staff Secretary's office. Prior to entering public service, she practiced litigation in Denver. And Jean serves as vice president and general counsel of America First Legal. Prior to AFL, Jean served as a counselor to the Attorney General at the United States Department of Justice. This was from 2017 to 2021. He provided legal advice, counsel, and strategic guidance. He's also served as a senior counsel to the Secretary of Homeland Security, general counsel on the Senate Committee on the Judiciary, and in a variety of other roles at Department of Homeland Security. So, May and Jean, welcome to our CEO policy chat.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Terrific. Well, we happen to be rounding up Women's History Month in the month of May, and I thought, let's talk about women in the workplace from a legal perspective, particularly through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think people have a good sense of what we're talking about when we talk about DEI, but I figure let's just kind of frame out DEI and some of the manifestations, more specifically, that we see in the workplace. So, what are some of the common forms of diversity, equity, inclusion that you have seen? Comical, ridiculous, or more serious? And either of you can start.
So I think for me, I'm going to focus a little bit on the E and the I, because we all have maybe a general sense of the D, although Jean and his group have done a very good job of pointing out some of the more ridiculous policies there. So inclusive and equity, pay equity, I think, is what a lot of people think about when they think about equity. So whether that's exposing publicly what people make, and then also bumping up people's salaries, ratcheting back people's salaries in order for everyone to make the same or what they should, something like that. Also, I think on the inclusiveness prong, you have a lot of affinity groups. So instead of I work at this company, I'm in the women's group, I'm in this race group, I'm in this LGBTQ plus AI group. So there's a lot of affinity groups. But then also inclusivity, I think, has been in some companies taken as informal dress codes. Not everyone can afford fancy clothes, so we're going to just do a sweatpants policy. Or I think sometimes people frame inclusive as parental leave. So there's no longer maternity leave. Now you've got maternity and paternity leave. Put aside how much help a guy can be after the baby is born. But, those are some, I think, lesser known DEI initiatives.
Yeah. I'll just add, I think we're seeing it. We have seen DEI, to play off of the way that May framed it, shift from a place where I think as a country we were striving for more diversity, just inclusiveness in the altruistic sense, to a place now where you have these DEI policies embedded within almost every major corporation and university across America, entire DEI departments who are dedicated to not increasing a company's bottom line or to helping produce the best work product or the best widget if you make widgets. Or even the best academics. It's to ensure that everything that entity does is infused with these concepts. And that plays out in a lot of ways that we at America First Legal certainly think are fairly problematic, because in short, to do what they want to do, to instill these DEI concepts and to see them through to fruition, it necessarily requires holding somebody down while you're raising somebody else up solely on the basis of an immutable characteristic, not based on the candidate's qualities or capabilities or their track record or anything. And it's leading to a place where, all these companies, they have these quotas, right? Which is something that just seems unfathomable, that a company would look at multiple applicants for a position and say, well, I don't know. They're all we've got 3 good candidates, but we don't have enough of, race X to meet our corporate quota goal. We need to hire that person based on that and put the other 2 people to the side. And I think that is something that it should be disturbing to everybody, regardless of your background, because, what's in vogue now might not be in vogue tomorrow. And who's discriminated against today might not be who's discriminated against tomorrow. And what we're striving for, and what our federal laws that have been on the books for, almost 60 years now, have guaranteed is equal treatment under the law, not to be discriminated against on the basis of those very same immutable characteristics. So
let me put a pin in that, Gene, because I want to dive more into the legality of a lot of these initiatives. But before we get there, I'll just add that I think it also, to your list of ways it plays out, both of you, is actually in the nonprofit sector as well, where, frankly, everything that happens in the corporate world filters over into the charitable world, where you're also seeing these calls for leadership of boards being, certain quotas, suggested quotas, or representative of certain communities, where charitable dollars go, needing to be, they should check a certain box in terms of who they're helping. And so we can't escape it, whether you're in academia, the nonprofit sector, or the for-profit sector. And so, yes, it is everywhere. And I think some of your examples are great. I will just add there, I have, in a separate hat, I have to do bias trainings for in a corporate setting. And I'm flabbergasted by some of the questions and the way the information is framed when it comes to DEI. Supposedly, it's supposed to help remove biases, but I think it reinforces them. But I think we'll get there. I will just say, underpinning both of what you said, and I love for you both to jump in here. We started out with diversity, and I think that's equality based, and now we've got that big equity word. Can either of you or both of you talk about the difference between equity and equality?
Yeah. So, I think Bernie Sanders really couldn't, and then decided after he'd heard the definitions that he was more of an equality guy. Yes. And, this year's International Women's Day, the theme was embracing equity. So everybody says that they want to do equity, but then when it comes down to it, oh gosh, they don't really like it, because I think what people mean by it is a little bit Marxist, which is we want to end up everyone in the same place. I've seen a picture that tries to explain what equity is, and you've got 3 people looking over the fence. One person is very tall, one person is medium, one person is short. And they say equity is just giving that short person a boost, giving them something to stand on. And I really disagree with that. That is accommodation. That's the American Disabilities Act. That is, if something you need a ramp. Not everyone needs a ramp. Not everyone needs a time to breastfeed at work, right? treating people where they are is an accommodation. That's different than equity. Equity is telling somebody that they are disadvantaged even when they're not. You, because you're a woman, you, because you're a minority, you are disadvantaged. And that is much different, I think, than an accommodation.
I think May's onto something, and I'll again borrow from her analogy here, and I'll say that equity further, the way that we see it play out in its end game, is taking those same three people, looking over the fence, and taking a machete to hack off the tall person's legs at the knees. I mean, that's really what these things lead to, and that, as grotesque as that analogy might be, it's where this stuff leads to, because you're focusing on outcomes instead of equal opportunity. And we all know that in life, that has its attraction in kind of the ivory tower intellectual sense of, oh, let's just get everybody equal and give everybody everything the same, and then life will be hunky-dory. But it doesn't play that way out over time. And also, look, it's a kind of situation where, again, I think fundamentally most Americans and most human beings reject the premise that anyone deserves more equal treatment than another, just because of the way that their skin color is, or the way that, whether they're a male or they're a female. The concept is that, the good Lord created us all different, but we are to all be treated the same. And I don't think that that's such an offensive, kind of starting premise. But what we are seeing more and more is the radical left adopting these, equity policies. I mean, in fact, the president of the United States issuing multiple executive orders now requiring equity to be infused into everything that the government does. And it leads us down a dangerous path, and it sets us up for a lot of damage, I think, to come to our society. And not to mention just those institutions where we're talking about corporations and universities and things of that sort.
So speaking of, let's go back to the legal questions. As you guys have both alluded to, discrimination against, based on race or gender, or frankly, a number of classes, is illegal. And so, you can't discriminate in hiring, you can't discriminate in pay. And we spend a lot of time at IWF debunking the pay gap as based on discrimination, but it's already illegal. Yet, how are we seeing the ridiculous bias trainings or the speech codes, the hair, some corporations not being able to set codes around hair and braids, for example? How is this? Is it passing legal muster, or how is it able to do so?
Jean, I think you're the one that's taken it to the EEOC. So
yeah, well, so look, what we are seeing, just to sum it all up, what we are seeing in so many places is blatantly unlawful. It just all it boils down to. You look at these corporations setting, again, if you are setting quotas that say that X percentage of our workforce needs to have this demographic characteristic, that necessarily means that within the hiring process, your HR managers and other folks who are involved are making selections based on those criteria. And so in their minds, they are rejecting candidates outright from the get-go, not to mention even at the interview stage, just because they know that they're not going to get their annual bonus if they don't meet their whatever quota for their employees that are there. And their executive compensation is tied to hitting these targets. And so there's a lot of things that are out there that are like this, that are just blatantly unlawful under Title VII, under the depending on the actor, under the 14th Amendment. There's Title IX as well, Title VI if it's involving federal funds. But all of this stuff goes on right now, and it goes on because there's a lot of money that a lot of people are making in a lot of this consulting industry and a lot of other places, and there's a lot of interesting interest behind them all. And, we're going to see it continue to advance until the point where it starts to extract actual economic pain on corporations. But just plainly, what we are seeing, I think, in so many of these cases, plain and simple, violates the law. And in fact, we submitted a request letter yesterday to the EEOC about Hershey's Corporation. They are one of these companies. You can go to www.aflegal.org and you can check it out for yourself. You can read our complaint. We put it all there in plain writing for everybody to see, screen grabs and the like, where they are imposing these things at Hershey's Corporation. This is a company that makes chocolate. What does chocolate have to do with your skin color? Nothing. I mean, it's insane. But this is the kind of stuff that we're seeing, and it was once widely recognized as being unlawful. And it's just gone by almost unchecked until, some recent efforts by organizations like ours and some courageous state AGs across the country.
Yeah, and just on the legal front, so there is a law, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, that says that companies cannot discriminate on the basis of race and other things. Put aside whether or not the federal government has the authority to govern decisions across the nation, all other states have non-discrimination requirements as well. And they add sexual orientation, they add all these other things. So, I think there are a lot of people who would say, well, those laws were meant to protect Black people against discrimination. True. But so they would say, well, because it's meant to protect Black people, therefore we can use affirmative action. And the Supreme Court has never bought that theory. And they're not going to buy that theory. But there's always been at the Supreme Court a softer look at affirmative action. Even though they don't totally buy in, they kind of work around it in a way that they say affirmative action is okay if it's kind of soft. You're just giving a little boost. You're not giving a quota. Or if you've got a really good reason, you've got a good reason for it. So because of that, I think affirmative action is therefore still legal in a lot of ways, because the Supreme Court has not been very clear what it means to not discriminate on the basis of race. And even though they say affirmative action is not okay, they have in practice allowed it.
So are either of you expecting any SCOTUS cases on the docket right now or in the very near future that's going to bring some clarity? I mean, I think a lot of people are kind of cued into in the academic setting, some of the lawsuits around discrimination against Asian students in, high performing schools or things like that. And I'm in the DC area. So a lot of people look at Virginia and TJ High School, where students had merit-based scholarship letters withheld because in some sort of weird way related to equity. So are you guys looking to SCOTUS right now in this term or in the near future to take on some of these questions?
So yes, there is the Harvard and the North Carolina case that is widely expected to cut back on the use of affirmative action in the collegiate setting.
Okay.
That ruling can't itself be sweeping. It will be limited to college, because colleges have been allowed to use affirmative action if they say the magic words, and their magic words is that you're pursuing the benefits of diversity in the classroom. Those magic words have never applied to businesses straight up. So it will take another case, I think, to address diversity initiatives in the workplace. That said, I think depending on how the Supreme Court writes, other companies can see the writing on the wall, but they're intransigent. It's going to take so much more. And I think Jean alluded to this, all the money involved. There are these companies, you can't even get a loan at a good rate as a company unless you have a good ESG score. We talk about ESG a lot of times in the clean energy, quote unquote, clean energy space, but it is when companies are doing a questionnaire to show what their ESG score is, tons of those answers on that questionnaire have to do with what does your board look like? Not like, who are they, but what do they actually physically look like?
Wow.
And so on. So yes, the Supreme Court will rule, but this problem is so embedded. I still think that we are several years away from seeing real change.
Yeah, May is exactly right. I am hopeful and optimistic for a good outcome in the Harvard, North Carolina cases. And we submitted an amicus brief in the Harvard case, arguing the plain language of the statute controls. And so there should be no affirmative action permitted because Congress made that decision itself. But again, May is exactly right. The decision is going to be limited to the context of university admissions. There's all kinds of other questions in processes that aren't going to be captured by that decision itself. And so the question becomes, what do folks do afterwards? And what do the universities do afterwards? And what do corporations do afterwards? And I would like to think, as an optimistic human being, that people will be altruistic and have good motives and say, oh, we see the writing on the wall. That in this context, they said this means this, and we probably shouldn't do that. And we should probably focus on merit-based admissions in universities, and we should do merit-based hiring in the workplace, and we should focus on these things. And I think that there might be some good folks who do that. And I think there's going to be a lot of folks who try to use smoke and mirrors to achieve what they were trying to do before, just through different metrics. So, for example, maybe they'll do admissions based on the zip code that you live in and give preferences based on zip codes. But of course, if you look at the demographic data in the zip codes, they're using it as a proxy. They'll use other things as proxies to reach some of the same results, which of course you can't use proxies to do what's unlawful, just to achieve the same objective. And so we'll see, but it really takes, I think, at the individual level, every American citizen to kind of search your heart and to make decisions on a daily basis in your workplace, in wherever you are, and say, you know what, I reject this. This is not, these things that I'm being asked to do, this is unlawful, and I'm going to speak up and I'm going to raise my voice, and there might be a consequence associated with that, or there might be a minor price to pay, but I'm not going to take it. This is not the country that we all focused and learned about and strive to create a better place for so many decades and so many years, to end up in a place where we're mandating discrimination on account of protected grounds to achieve desired social outcomes. That's just it's not a good place.
And looking at it from a policy lens, I'll just add, for some, the intentions may be noble in the idea of saying there have been people who've been marginalized for different reasons, not necessarily just because of who they are as individuals, but our nation has a history that includes slavery, that includes legal discrimination for a period of time that certainly has disenfranchised and disempowered Black people. But I like to say we are no longer living in that time period. And this is actually the best time to be a woman in this country, and the best time to be a minority in this country, the best time to hopefully to practice your faith, whatever faith that is. We could probably have a whole discussion on religious liberty, but I think that we've seen so much progress, and that gets negated in an attempt. I think it's a fleeting goal for a perfect society where everyone views everyone with zero malice in their heart and zero prejudice. And you're trying to legislate away something that's a hard issue more than it is necessarily something that law will correct. So I'm hopeful, like you guys. I'm very hopeful that we see this. And this is just a broader question. Do you think that we actually need any of this kind of DEI? Or I think, May, to bring it back to how you began this discussion, you talked about all of us, and I think we're all in agreement that diversity is important. Do we feel like there is a need for some kind of diversity training or initiatives in the corporate setting, particularly when you look at women and their representation in the workplace? Or do you feel like, I think we're actually in a good place where, no, we just need to let the market work the way it does, let individuals make the choices that they want to make, and however we end up is however we end up?
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference between an individual hiring person saying, I think I would like to have women in the workplace. I just, I think it'll be good for the team. Like, we have no women. We need that. For me, I have often been the only woman or one of the only women in a group full of men. And I think that I add tremendous value, and I'm happy to talk about that value. And I think that people have recognized that value. And it's not just because I am a worker, it's because I'm a worker and I'm a woman, and I bring the things that I bring with me. And so that type of awareness of, I guess you could call it diversity, I think is good and reasonable. And it is, I think, to put a major difference between that and having people experience women and all the things, maternity leave, navigating that, postpartum, coming back and navigating that, that is a lot different than saying, I want to have 5 women, regardless of whether it's good for my team, regardless of whether it's good for my company, because I need to answer the questionnaire that I have 5 women so that I can get a lower interest rate on a loan.
Yeah, it's diversity can mean so much and so many different things. But one of the things that I think that we have to be honest with ourselves about is pursuing diversity in the most altruistic sense, and not focusing only on things like sex or skin color, but also life experiences. And kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm an anti-elitist, but cracking the Ivy League, kind of grip on so much of our power centers in this country. There's so many good people with so many great life experiences and things in flyover country in the United States, who are, not necessarily, their viewpoints aren't always necessarily welcomed in boardrooms and in some of the institutes of higher education and things. And so if you're going to pursue diversity, you have to consider all kinds of diversity and, political ideology and other things of that sort. Again, just trying to make sure that you're taking into account as many perspectives as possible, so that you can then, in turn, for your corporation, deliver the best product, or in the university, deliver the best education, or whatever the case may be. But the problem, of course, with DEI and with equity in particular is that it just results in kind of perverted outcomes that aren't real and that aren't natural, and people would recognize this. I mean, no one would watch the NBA with an equity policy. I mean, they just wouldn't do it. I mean, if you had NBA managers who said, "I want my NBA team to look like America," well, that's not focusing on the best and brightest players, and so you would not get fans who are there watching the game, paying attention to things. But somehow in the corporate sector, you have a bunch of executives and managers who are just being convinced and lied to by people who don't have the corporation's best interests at heart, that somehow they're going to keep making a lot of money and they're going to do their best while doing all these other things. And so when you take it to that extreme and you use that as an example, I think it's intuitive. And you say, well, of course not. You just want the best person for the job. But, it doesn't play out that way on a daily basis, because people aren't thinking about it in those terms. So I would encourage folks to think about it in those terms, and think about, hey, look, what shouldn't matter? Your skin color shouldn't matter. Your sex shouldn't matter. All that matters is that you hire the best candidate for the job, or that you're promoting the best candidate for the job. And you're trying to be as altruistic in your approach to ensuring that you have the best workforce possible.
And one thing, I think, to hop on Jean's point, when we're talking about diversity, I think that there are some things that can be beneficial to improve the pond that we're fishing in. So if you're only hiring from Yale, you just always hired from Yale, you're not going to get any sort of real diversity. But if you go to the state schools, if you say you don't need a college degree, if companies can, and nonprofits can, open their minds to the world of Americans, I think that is something that DEI initiatives say that they support, and that in practice can be very beneficial, because as I have learned in Washington, you got to know somebody to get in. Well, a lot of people don't know somebody. And one way that we could really increase fairness, I hate all DEI, I hate all those words, but the way to increase fairness is by stop being so elitist.
I can't agree with you guys more. And you actually have guided the conversation exactly where I wanted to round it up, which is talking about, the place for diversity and true diversity. I don't think anyone is reflexively anti-diversity, but I think we're reflexively, we don't like the idea of diversity just so narrowly focused on gender and race, and I guess now sexual orientation, while leaving aside all of the other things that really make for a good employee, that make for someone who's more than qualified for the positions, the board spots, all of the things that we're looking for in the workplace. That's your background, your life experience. Jean, you were talking about socioeconomic background. I think that's absolutely right. And Independent Women's Forum, we actually signed on to True Diversity, which is an initiative by the Philanthropy Roundtable, to provide kind of a toolkit to nonprofits and foundations and organizations that want to say, hey, we want to celebrate true diversity, which is not just skin color and gender, but it is embracing of the individual as someone who is unique and brings unique skill sets and experiences and lived and values to the workplace, and that organizations are, number one, should be mission focused. Companies should be focused on creating that widget, as Jean said, or delivering on the bottom line, not on equity or even diversity as a goal. That equality and diversity can be a way of achieving your mission, or a way of getting the best product to the market and being the best in your industry. It shouldn't be the end goal. So I appreciate our conversation here, and my takeaways, if I can name them from what you guys talked about, is absolutely number one, discrimination is illegal, and we shouldn't be discriminating to remedy past discriminations either. That is also illegal. And number two, there are ways where we can have an idea, utilize diversity in a way that builds and enhances, rather than is just kind of window dressing. But there's a lot of work to do. And obviously, when diversity or DEI goals are tied to your compensation as a president of a company, or frankly, down the food chain, or whether it's tied to the social credit system, where you can't get a loan if you don't hit in certain marks around the S and ESG. That is very scary. And at IWF, we also have a team that works a lot on ESG and pushing back on ESG. And so, we're doing our part. I would love just to give you guys a minute to share some final thoughts and any action items that someone, who just sat through another awful bias training could do. What can we do in our own way to fight back against what is frankly un-American, unfair, and sometimes unjust?
Yeah, so I guess one thing that I want to share is the stigma that comes with DEI for the people who are the beneficiaries. As a female who used to be considered a minority, now Asians are considered white, so it kind of just depends on the year. I have been a beneficiary of affirmative action in certain ways. And I think that it can, for some people, make you think that the world is a way that it isn't, that somehow you have been discriminated against, that somehow you are at a disadvantage, you're not as smart, you aren't as deserving. And so I think one of the difficulties is for the beneficiaries after that bias training to not let it affect you, to not let it change you, and to continue to improve yourself to match the level that you know that you are and that you can be.
Awesome.
Yeah. So a little bit of self-promotion, go to www.aflegal.org. We're on this stuff all the time. So whether it's in the federal government, like I said, Joe Biden issued an executive order a couple of months ago that requires DEI to be infused into literally everything that the government does. And so we're on top of that. We're tracking it. We're gearing up for some things, and we have some things in the works. We have lawsuits going against different corporations and universities for using these programs in ways that violate the law. And of course, as a lawyer, I'm not going to get into the details or specifics of those cases, but I'd encourage you to go to our website. All of our press releases are there. We lay out the facts. You can read more about all of the information that's there. And then the last thing I would say is that we have at America First Legal the Center for Legal Equality. And if you are a person who has been subjected to one of these programs, or you've been denied a job or a benefit or promotion or something on account of one of these programs, we encourage you to contact us. Just holler, let us know. We want to hear more about it, and we'd love to talk to you. So there's a lot that can be done, but what it takes at the end of the day is as I alluded to before, is every person stepping up in their own way, in their own place, in their own city, in their own town, their own job, and saying, no, I've had enough. This no more. I am going to be part of the movement that's going to stop this thing once and for all. I will put my name on that lawsuit. I will sign my name to that petition. I will tell that manager that, no, I am not going to violate the law when I'm making a new hire. It takes that type of action, I think, on an individual basis, repeated nationwide, to actually make a real difference.
Terrific. Well, thank you both. Jean Hamilton, America First Legal, May Mailman, Independent Women's Legal Center. Thank you both for your time today. And thank you to all of our viewers. We appreciate you just spending a couple of minutes with us, maybe 30. But we hope you found this informative and helpful to what you do. And you know what? If you want to continue the conversation, we have a place for you. Independent Women's Network is our place. It's kind of our hangout spot, our members only community, where we, myself and others at Independent Women's Forum, we come together and we really share, provide tools, have regular programming like events and resources to help you, take some action in your communities, with your schools, wherever you want a place to have a voice and to be empowered. We are right there with you. And before you go, please go to iwf.org/CEO. That is the Center for Economic Opportunity, your host for today's policy chat. You can sign up for our newsletter, which will be coming out on tomorrow. So please, you don't want to miss all of the analysis, all of the stories that we're following, the op-eds that we're writing on tech, labor, and economic broad policy. So thank you for tuning in. And until next time, we hope you will be well, you will strive, and you will thrive. Thanks so much. I'm Patrice Onwuka.
All right.